My name is Adrien. I'm 27. And this whole mess began on my birthday. We were at a small Italian place my mom picked. The kind with checkered tablecloths and a framed photo of Naples on the wall. My mom leaned across the table with a cheerful smile. We didn't get you anything this year. Money's tight. Everyone chuckled like it was a joke. I smiled because I've learned how to be polite even when it stings. It wasn't the lack of a gift that hurt. It was the tone. The ease. Like I'd always be fine going without. Because I'm the responsible one. The one who always lands on his feet. A few months earlier, Dad had called about bills. He said hours were cut. He said things were piling up. I transferred a few thousand without thinking. Family comes first. That's what I was taught. So I told myself it was fine tonight. I told myself birthdays don't matter to adults. Across the table, my younger brother Kyle scrolled his phone. He smirked at something he didn't share. He's 23. He lives rent-free. He brainstorms life plans between gym shifts and motivational posts. When he crashed his car, they covered him. When he dropped out, they blamed the school. When I held 2 jobs in college, they called it character building. I ate my spaghetti and tried to be grateful. The universe didn't care. The next morning, Kyle's old friend called me. He can't keep a secret to save his life. Dude, you see the Rolex your brother got? I blinked. What watch? The Rolex, man. He showed everyone last night. Your parents surprised him. My hand shook when I opened Instagram. Kyle's wrist filled my screen. Polished bezel. A smug caption. When your parents know you deserve the best. The comments roared with approval. In the background, a box and a crumpled receipt peeked out. I recognized my mom's looping handwriting on the gift note. The sting from dinner turned sharp. Not because of the watch. Because of the truth behind it. The money I sent to keep the lights on wrapped itself around Kyle's wrist. Money's tight. Tight enough to buy him a luxury I would never buy myself. I said nothing that first day. I am good at silence. I rationalized. Maybe they split the cost. Maybe Dad got a bonus. Maybe Kyle chipped in. But my mind kept circling the same point. I wasn't support. I was supply. And my family had learned how to dress taking as love. That thought followed me into meetings. Followed me into sleep. Followed me back to the house I grew up in. I showed up unannounced one evening. Kyle leaned on his car, Rolex laughing in the sunset. Like the new toy, he grinned. Mom stepped onto the porch before I answered. Her arms were crossed. Her eyes were tight. She moved faster than my words. Isn't it beautiful? She said brightly. He deserves it. He's been under so much stress. Stress. I almost laughed. Dad appeared behind her with a tired sigh. Let's not start anything. We should be proud of Kyle. Proud didn't taste the same in my mouth as it did in theirs. For me, proud meant dependable. Proud meant silent. Proud meant pay when asked. I lowered my voice. The money I sent. Was it for this? The air went thin. Mom's look flickered, then hardened. Don't be dramatic. We sacrificed plenty for you. Doesn't your brother deserve something nice for once? For once. Kyle tapped the watch face and smirked. Lighten up, Adrien. You make good money. What's a couple grand to you? Besides, you'd never buy this for yourself. You're too boring. He didn't feel entitled to a watch. He felt entitled to me. Mom took one step down and spoke softly like a verdict. You're reliable. That's who you are. Don't resent your role. Your role. Like I was a character they wrote, and the scene could never change. Something hot lit in my chest. But rage is a trap. Turns truth into noise. So I swallowed it. Got it, I said. My voice cracked just enough for them to think they'd won. Inside me, a line I didn't know existed snapped. I went home and lay awake in the dark. I replayed the receipts I couldn't unsee. I replayed money's tight against the gleam of a Rolex. I told myself the story I was afraid to say aloud. If they could lie to me about this, what else could they lie about? I didn't have an answer, but I knew the questions would only get louder. And I knew silence wasn't going to save me anymore. A week later, my bank called on a Saturday morning. A polite voice asked to confirm a purchase over $6,000. Luxury electronics. Shipped to my parents' address. I stared at the ceiling. I didn't make that purchase. The account froze with a click. The fraud report began with a quiet apology. I drove to my parents' house in slow, careful anger. Mom stirred a pot of sauce and hummed. Dad watched a game with his shoes off. Cal flicked the Rolex like a habit. Who used my card? I asked. No one moved. Mom's spoon stopped midair. She said the sentence people use to make theft sound generous. It was just easier that way. We'll pay you back. I laughed without joy. With what? The money I keep sending? Cal finally looked up. Relax, big bro. You should be grateful we trust you enough to lean on you. Grateful. For being robbed. Dad spoke softly like he was tired of the same old argument. Don't blow this out of proportion. Family share. I took a breath that hurt on the way in. Sharing is when both people agree. This is theft. Mom's voice sharpened. Stop being dramatic. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. And this is how you treat us. Cal stood and stepped close. He lifted his wrist into my face. Face it, Adrien. You'll never stop us. You're the responsible one. It's who you are. You'll keep playing it. Because without us, you're nothing. I left because staying would have broken more than trust. In the dark of my apartment, something terrifying settled into clarity. They weren't going to stop. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. I wasn't son or brother to them. I was an ATM with a pulse. So I did two things that night. I cried on the kitchen floor where no one could call me dramatic. And then I stood up. I opened a fresh folder and wrote one word on the tab. Family. I called the bank again. I locked everything. I pulled my credit report. There they were. 2 credit cards I didn't recognize. Opened months ago. Linked to my parents' address. I filed disputes with shaking hands. Humiliating doesn't begin to describe the feeling. But every page I added to the folder felt like oxygen. Meeting notes went into the folder. Dates. Amounts. Screenshots. Receipt photos. Call logs. Every gaslight got pinned to paper. Every "you're overreacting" got a timestamp. I learned the language of boundaries in a week. No is a complete sentence. Silence is a strategy, not surrender. Distance is not punishment. It's protection. I stopped answering certain calls. I stopped sending money. When Mom asked about the higher-than-usual electric bill, I said, no. She turned disappointment into a knife and called me selfish. I didn't bleed. When Dad hinted about unexpected expenses, I said, you'll figure it out. He muttered that I changed. I took it as a compliment. Kyle's post still bragged. Hard work pays off. Born to shine. I ate eggs and peanut butter and watched my account rebuild. I went to the gym. I learned to sleep again. I said yes to a networking invite. A side project landed in my lap because I showed up. A raise followed because I delivered. I told no one. I kept that victory private like a fragile flame. I met an old friend, Marcus, and told him the whole story. He didn't flinch or pity me. Adrien, he said, that isn't family. That's theft. That's abuse. Hearing it named out loud snapped something into place. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't dramatic. I was finally accurate. One afternoon I stopped by the house out of curiosity. Not hope. Kyle arrived late in a new designer jacket with tags. Mom squealed like it was Christmas. Dad chuckled like pride was oxygen. Kyle leaned close and whispered only for me. Paid with your money too. Cheers, big bro. My fork tapped the plate. No one noticed. Inside me, stillness spread like a lake freezing. Not rage. Not defeat. Just stillness. The kind that comes before a decision. I went home and opened the folder. I added dates, sums, names, and the sentence paid with your money. I slept with the binder on my desk like a seatbelt. The next weeks were a fog of choices. I learned to deflect. I can't help right now. I'm focusing on some things of my own. I became boring on purpose. Boring is hard to argue with. Boring won't fight in your living room. Boring just continues to build. Work noticed. I stood taller without asking anyone's permission. I read contracts like puzzles. I read my family the same way. Numbers didn't add up. Stories had seams. I pressed gently and watched the edges split. Unopened mail lay on their counter like secrets. A statement with Kyle's name stared up at me. Restaurants. Gadgets. Past due. I slid it back under the envelopes. I memorized the total. I took a walk with Dad and caught a phrase he didn't mean to say. If Adrien finds out the rest, we're finished. The rest. The word lodged like a shard. That night, a collections firm appeared in a notification on Dad's phone. I memorized the name and looked it up later. It wasn't small. It was the kind that comes when the house itself is at stake. The Rolex and the jacket weren't just favoritism. They were cover. They were sparkle to distract from the sinkhole. Knowing their truth didn't make me cruel. It made me careful. I kept my distance. I kept my binder. I kept my calm. I kept building a life where I was not a tool. One dinner, Kyle leaned over and tried to sting me again. Bet you missed us, huh? I smiled and said 2 words. You'll see. He frowned for the first time in months. A hairline crack. I went home and slept without the binder for once. I knew I'd need it again. But not for revenge. For something I couldn't have imagined yet. For closure that isn't cold. For an ending that doesn't look like theirs. For a version of peace I hadn't learned how to believe in. Yet, fall turned the maple leaves outside my apartment into small fires. I drank coffee by the window and read the letter from the bank. Fraud removed. Credit restored. Evidence attached. The paperwork told a story in signatures and timestamps. Sloppy forms. Familiar handwriting. Numbers that finally made sense. I slid it into the binder and closed the cover gently. Across town, Kyle's captions changed tone. Less swagger. More noise. Comments started asking questions he couldn't laugh off. Didn't you quit your job? How are you paying for this? Silence is a poor accountant. Within weeks, the watch post slowed. Then stopped. At my parents' house, tension moved in like a permanent guest. My mom's texts swung between sweet and sharp. My dad's calls grew shorter. Kyle didn't call at all. I kept my line steady. I can't help. I'm focused on my own responsibilities. I thought the story would end with collapse. I thought that was justice. But justice isn't always the same as healing. The foreclosure notice arrived like winter. It was Leah, a friend in real estate, who told me first. She spoke with the care people use when delivering hard truths. Adrien, she said, the house is in trouble. Missed payments. Collections. An auction date is set. I sat very still and watched a leaf drift down 6 floors. It hit the sidewalk with the softest sound. I thanked Leah. I made tea. I didn't call anyone. A younger version of me would have rushed to the auction. He would have bid with shaking hands and called it poetic. He would have stood on a porch with papers and power. He would have mistaken possession for peace. But I wasn't him anymore. I set the letter beside the binder and opened a blank page. At the top, I wrote 3 words. What matters now? I wrote answers slowly, like building a bridge instead of a wall. My safety. My dignity. The truth. A future where I don't live inside their chaos. A future where I can look in the mirror and still like the man I see. I wrote 2 more words under the list. If possible. Forgiveness. Not forgetting. Not excusing. Forgiveness as a boundary that lets me walk forward without dragging chains. I closed the binder and put on my coat. I drove to the house I grew up in and parked a street away. I stood under a tree and watched my parents on the porch. My mother's arms were wrapped around herself like a coat she didn't own. My father sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Kyle wasn't there. Maybe he was looking for a pawn shop. Maybe he was learning how heavy quiet can be. I thought of the version of me who would have savored this. I let him pass through me and go. I walked up the path uninvited and knocked once. Mom answered with surprise and 1,000 words in her eyes. Dad stood slowly. No one smirked. No one pretended. What do you want? Mom asked, small and brittle. Closure, I said. And to try something different. We sat at the kitchen table where I learned multiplication and swallowed 100 small hurts. My accounts are secured, I began. My credit is repaired. I have a record of everything. I am not here to argue about it. I know what happened. I'm here to tell you what can happen next. Silence waited with us. I kept my voice even. You are in debt. You are losing the house. You can choose humiliation. Or you can choose humility. You can choose to double down. Or you can choose to change. Mom's eyes filled in a way I hadn't seen since I was 10. Dad looked at the floor like the truth was written there. What does that even mean? He asked, voice rough. It means I'll help with a plan, I said. Not with cash. Not with secrets. With a plan you sign. With conditions you keep. With honesty that does not bend. Kyle slipped in through the back door like a shadow that forgot to be loud. He stared at me like we were strangers. The watch was still on his wrist. It means, I continued, you call the bank with me here and agree to a hardship program. You sell what can be sold. You hire a nonprofit counselor and stick to the budget they build. You put my name on nothing. You open no credit with my information. You apologize without asterisks. And you go to family therapy for 6 months. Together. Every week. Mom swallowed. Dad nodded once before he meant to. Kyle gave a short laugh that wasn't brave. This is ridiculous, he said. We don't need his help. We'll figure it out. I turned to him. You have figured it out by taking. You can figure it out now by letting go. The watch goes first. Today. His mouth opened to spit a joke and just didn't. He looked down at the face that had once made him feel untouchable. Silence weighed more than gold. He unclasped it with hands that trembled and set it on the table. Mom made a small sound like a string breaking. Dad wiped his eyes. I didn't reach for the watch. It wasn't mine. It was a symbol. Symbols belong to the lessons they teach. We made calls that afternoon. To the bank. To a counselor. To a therapist. I sat with them while the hold music played. I didn't pay anything. I didn't sign anything. I watched adults do what adults have to do when the story changes. When the sun went down, I stood to leave. Mom touched the edge of the table like a dock before a difficult swim. Adrien, she whispered. I'm sorry. There was no but. It landed like rain where a field has been waiting too long. Dad stood and squared himself like the man I wanted to admire. I am sorry, he said. I let pride ruin us. Kyle's voice was small. I'm sorry, he said. I made you a villain because it kept me from seeing myself. Nothing fixed in that 1 minute. But a door opened. And for once no one slammed it. I took a breath that didn't hurt. I forgive you, I said. The words surprised even me. They did not erase the binder. They did not evaporate debt. But they untied something in my chest I had carried since the night of the watch. I forgive you, I repeated. And I will keep my boundaries. Both can be true. I left with the plan in motion and my dignity intact. Weeks became months. Therapy was messy. Old stories resisted the light. But we sat in the room and named things by their right names. Abuse. Manipulation. Enmeshment. Avoidance. We practiced different words. Yes. Enough. I'm sorry. Thank you. We learned how to talk without making the other person smaller. We learned how to listen without building a defense in our heads. Kyle got a job at a warehouse and didn't post about it. He sold sneakers he never wore. He paid what he could and didn't call it heroism. Mom cooked at home and stopped using tight to mean lie. Dad met with the counselor every week even when it bruised his pride. I kept my own life steady. I lifted weights. I led projects. I laughed with friends who knew the whole story. Sometimes I opened the binder and read the pages like weather reports from another season. Sometimes I closed it and put it back on the shelf with gratitude. Not for what happened. For who I didn't become because of it. Thanksgiving came with simpler food and fewer speeches. Halfway through dinner, Mom stood and cleared her throat. "Adrien," she said, "we don't have the right words, but we're learning. Thank you for not saving us. Thank you for helping us save ourselves." My father raised his glass of iced tea. "To truth," he said. "To boundaries," I added. Kyle lifted water and met my eyes. "To forgiveness," he finished, voice steady. After dessert, I walked outside alone and watched the streetlights blur into quiet halos. I thought of the boy who believed he had to buy love with obedience. I thought of the man who almost mistook revenge for relief. I thought of the version of me standing on a porch with auction papers and a victory that would sour in my mouth. I let them all go. The night was cold and honest. I put my hands in my pockets and smiled. Forgiveness hadn't excused anything. It had simply set me down where I could finally rest. On my side of the boundary, facing forward, with enough room in me to wish them better without giving them my life. When I got home, I slid a final page into the binder. One word: closure. Then I put it away. Not like a weapon, like a book I had finished. I turned off the lamp. Peace settled in the room like it knew my name. This time I believed it,